today we start the actual analysis of the different theories of the Kennedy assassination, and it is essential that one starts with the theory that Lee Harvey Oswald killed President Kennedy, and he did so by himself, not as part of any larger conspiracy. Everyone generally postulates that this book here, Case Closed, by Gerald Posner, is in fact considered to be the outstanding original book attempting to justify that theory. In fact, the Christian Science Monitor refers to it as the starting point of any examination of Kennedy's death. This particular book. And for those of you who intend to argue that Lee Harvey Oswald did do it and did it alone, this is an essential larger reading for you in preparing your thesis at the end of the course. You'll see that, for example, Time Magazine refers to it as, it says, with the publication of Case Closed, suddenly everyone agrees Oswald did it and he acted alone. Now, this you'll see over and over again this dynamic occur in this course, that you say, wow, Time Magazine says that everyone agrees and that Oswald acted alone. And then you discover that over 70% of the American citizens don't believe that he did it and acted alone. And you say, well, wait a second, I thought everybody agreed that Time Magazine was kind of a legitimate and credible source. And then the job falls to you to figure out what Time Magazine is all about, and who owns Time Magazine, and who Henry Luce was, and what his background is, and what his connections are, etc. But what we're doing today, in the first of the theories that we're going to be addressing, that what we want to do is we want to basically take Time Magazine at what most of the people in the country think it is. It's kind of an honest and objective, though somewhat abbreviated, account of reality for the American people. That it's supposed to be kind of trusted, not unlike the New York Times. That it was kind of a more abbreviated form of the New York Times. But then. So we've cited the Christian Science Monitor's opinion of this particular work in Time Magazine, and then it says Posner builds an impressive case that Oswald was the assassin and that he acted alone. This is a detailed study and a searing expose of the shoddy and deceptive work that is undertaken by the so-called conspiracy theorists. Well, then you note that it's the Tulsa World that is the one that said that, and then you have to start thinking about what Oklahoma is all about, and who are the people that run Oklahoma, and you got the Kerr-McGee Nuclear Corporation there, and Kerr-McGee, and major big oil company people, and stuff like that. So it's kind of the heart of the oil country, and you realize that some significant percentage of the conspiracy theories link the conspiracy to oil and the major petroleum financiers. But then disquietingly, you find the San Francisco Examiner. You say, well, what's the San Francisco Examiner going to say about this particular work? And what it says is that Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK, and he did so alone. There were no accomplices involved, no Russian spies, no mobsters, no Cuban hitmen. The Warren Commission certainly made mistakes, but its fundamental thesis that Oswald was the assassin and that he acted alone remains entirely sound. Gerald Posner's thesis is this, and he makes the argument so persuasively that the title of the book, Case Closed, is entirely justified. Okay? Yes, Wesley.
So if you have to take in consideration that these quotes are from the beginning of the book that you're reading, so those...
Oh yeah, there's no doubt that the publisher has selected those quotes that are the most favorable.
Yeah, like
the one here that says that he has his head up his butt isn't included at the beginning of his own book. But the fact that Time Magazine would say that, and that the San Francisco Examiner would say that, etc., is important to take into account. And so what I want to do is I want to today to present to you what the thesis is that proponents such as Gerald Posner maintains. And there is another book that, if you want to read this one, this is Vincent Buglosi's book, the big 1,500-page tome that is an extraordinary piece of writing. Covers everything from soup to nuts, almost every one of the theories, with detailed footnotes. But it is a great demonstration of what was referred to in the earlier reading that we did about different worldviews, about the power of narrative. If you start out with a specific assumption and that you construct a completely consistent narrative, and you marshal your facts in accordance with your narrative, you can have an extraordinarily persuasive presentation. But as was pointed out in the readings that we did for the first week, that there's a great danger in a narrative like that, because it has the capacity of slipping certain facts, just setting those aside and not covering them. It has a way of kind of nuancing a particular assertion, editing the findings in a way that is consistent with its narrative, and that's what you see occur in both of these books. Both of these major works by Vincent Buglosi and Gerald Posner are considered kind of definitive examples of the deceptive quality of a narrative. Okay, but it's important to remember that that's basically true of every one of the narratives. That every one of the consistent theses that are set forth explaining a particular opinion about what it is that happened is in fact a narrative, and that each of the authors has her or his own particular perspective that they wish to kind of persuade you is true. And so you have to always keep that in mind throughout this entire course that you're going to be working at. Now, but as I say, I told you before, you walk into almost any bookstore now, that here we are in October. We're coming on to just a month or so before the 50th anniversary of one of the most historically well-known incidents of the last century. And so you're finding lots and lots of books around about it, one of which I pointed out is The Skeptic. Now, the Skeptic magazine, as I mentioned to you earlier, is devoted to disproving any affirmative thesis that you can put up. Anything. Earth is round, moon's still in the sky, we're the only intelligent species in the universe, those kind of things. The Skeptic magazine sets out to destroy it. It's basically, it engages in a process they call pataphysics. There's actually a college de pataphysique that's in Paris that they actually take assignments from people around the world every year to set forth any kind of positive assertion you want to make, and then they pick one and then they destroy it. And Skeptic magazines like that. And so what they do is I said, oh great. I said they've got an article on the conspiracy theories, and so what they're going to do is they're going to point out that some skeptics are actually correct, such as all the skeptics who are skeptical about the Warren Commission report and the theory that Oswald did this alone. But it turns out that the people that they're criticizing and of whom they're skeptical, in this case, are the skeptics. So they've gone on some length, but it's a very worthwhile article. I've added this to your short syllabus so that you can just punch right onto it and pull it up. And they've given us permission for you guys all to ridicule this as much as you like.
Also, we have 2 readings on eCommons and on the website.
Is what?
It's also in week 2
Okay.
readings on eCommons and the website.
Okay, so that's where you'll find it. During week 2, you'll find this, and there's a section in here which I think is important for us to start our conversation with, and it sets forth the following. It says that it starts listing specific factual contentions, which if you take them at their face value, which is what we're doing here today, they start to build a very interesting and sort of persuasive vision of what has happened here. They said, for example, that there was in fact found on the 6th floor of the Texas Book Depository on November 22nd of 1963 what they call a sniper's nest. That there was in fact up on the 6th floor, up on one corner of the 6th floor, there were these books all stacked up in a little semicircle around where the windows were, and there was another set of books that were all stacked up right by the window that would have been perfect for a rest for a rifle. So that's a fact that was found, and it said that 3 spent rifle shells were found on the floor nearby that sniper's nest. And it said that a bolt-action Italian Mannlicher Carcano rifle was found stashed between boxes on the opposite side of that floor, on the 6th floor, where the president had just been shot. Okay? And so they found this Italian rifle there on the 6th floor, and it said that it had been stashed opposite, right near the stairwell. And that number 4 says ballistic markings, which are as distinctive as fingerprints, proved that the 3 shells had been fired from that rifle to the exclusion of all others. Now, it's a little strange, because you don't shoot shells, but I take it they're referring to the bullets, because the shells are ejected from the rifle when it's a bolt action, and you shoot the bullet from the casing, and the casings are ejected. So they found the casings on the floor, and then it said 1 nearly intact bullet and several bullet fragments were recovered from the presidential limousine and from the president's body, and that the bullet and the 2 largest recovered fragments proved by ballistic markings to have been fired from that same rifle. So what they're actually saying is that both the shell casings and the bullets were proven to have come from the same rifle, the Carcano, the Mannlicher Carcano that was found on the 6th floor. And it says who owned that rifle. Documentary evidence assembled established beyond any question that the weapon had been purchased through a mail order under an assumed name used by Lee Harvey Oswald. And it says that he was in fact one of the very few of all of the employees in the Texas Book Depository that when the president's motorcade drove by, he was one of the very few that never left the building to go out to watch the motorcade go by. And then it says fingerprints were lifted from the trigger housing of that rifle and were determined to be those of Lee Harvey Oswald. And a palm print was found of Lee Harvey Oswald on the rifle. And the palm prints of Lee Harvey Oswald were found on the boxes, stacked up by the window. And the handwriting experts unanimously agreed that it was Lee Harvey Oswald's handwriting on the order form that ordered that rifle through the mail, as well as the paperwork at the post office where it was signed for after it had been delivered, was the handwriting of Lee Harvey Oswald. And then it said that Oswald was brought into the realm of being a suspect for the killing of President Kennedy because he had been arrested for the shooting and killing of J.D. Tippit, a police officer from the Dallas Police Department. That he'd been arrested for that and had been already taken into custody for that. And it says that the autopsy of the president confirmed that the shots had come from above and behind the limousine, which is directly above and behind where the Texas Book Depository is, where the sniper's nest had been found, where the rifle had been found, where the shells had been found, where the rifle was proven to have been the one that fired the shots that were found to have killed the president. And it also points out, quite disquietingly, that when spectrographic tests were run on the metallurgy of that particular bullet and the fragments that were found in the president's limousine and in the president's body, when a spectrographic analysis was run of that metal, it was proven to be absolutely identical to the bullet that was found on the stretcher of Governor Connolly. And it said that the x-rays in the autopsy photographs that were of a panel that was appointed by Ramsey Clark, a very liberal Democrat, affirmed the conclusions of the autopsy report that the president had been killed by shots fired from above and behind him in a direct trajectory that lines up with the window of the 6th floor of the Texas Book Depository. And it goes on to point out that, and that is 20 different pieces of evidence, all pointing to Lee Harvey Oswald. And then it goes on to point out that they had ample evidence that Oswald had expressed great contempt for the capitalist system and for the government of the United States. And that he had a record of violence, a history of violence, that he had in fact threatened his sister-in-law with a knife when he was just a teenager, that he had engaged in physical abuse of his wife, that he had beaten his wife, Marina, and his wife, Marina, testified that Oswald had confessed to her on April 10th of 1963, just basically May, June, July, August, September, 7 months. 7 months prior to the assassination of President Kennedy. She testified under oath that Oswald had admitted to her that he had attempted to assassinate General Edwin Walker. Edwin Walker was an extremely conservative, indeed reactionary, military official who was in Dallas, and on April 10th, someone had fired a rifle shot through his window of his home and just missed killing him. And Marina Oswald testifies that Lee Harvey Oswald admitted to her that that had been he. And that there's 4 different witnesses who have verified that Lee Harvey Oswald, subsequent to that, had actually gone and attended another public speech by General Edwin Warren, which is directly contrary. His political views are directly contrary to every political view that Oswald had ever expressed. So that it's unlikely that he went there to hear him because he was sympathetic to his positions. And, of course, other well-known things, that Oswald had been arrested in Dallas for engaging in street handing out pamphlets in favor of Castro and very critical of the U.S. government policy against Castro's government. And that he, in fact, had been actually obtaining subscriptions to magazines such as The Militant, which had specifically revealed information the month before that the Kennedy administration was involved in a covert program to attempt to violently overthrow Fidel Castro, whom Lee Harvey Oswald had repeatedly expressed sympathy toward. So what you have here is a listing of some 27 different individual facts that relate to Lee Harvey Oswald. And when you start reviewing these, if you're objective and honest with yourself, you have to begin to say to yourself, this is fairly frightening information. This is information which you can expect if a police investigator was put into possession of this information, that they would be led to believe that this person, it was more probable than not, had actually been the person who shot the president. And you go back and you discover that, when I mentioned, he'd been arrested for killing Officer J.D. Tippit. And what you have 4 witnesses, 4 eyewitnesses, who testify under oath that they identified Lee Harvey Oswald as the man who shot and killed J.D. Tippit at 1:46 p.m., just a little more than an hour and 15 minutes after President Kennedy had been assassinated. And at the scene of the death of J.D. Tippit, you find 4 shell casings, 4 shell casings present on the ground near his body, and says that of these, there were 4 slugs in J.D. Tippit's body. 4 of the slugs. That 3 of them were Winchester Western slugs, and 1 was a slug of a different brand of Remington Peters in his body. And the cartridges on the ground, that 2 of them were Western, Winchester Western, and 2 of them were Remington Peters. And when Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested in the theater, and we'll go through some details of this, just like 15 minutes later, he was in possession of a .38 caliber pistol. It had 5 bullets in it, and 3 of them were Winchester Western, and 2 of them, the other 3, were Remington Peters. Now, the question then immediately arises is, would an objective investigator who had this kind of evidence directed toward Lee Harvey Oswald, that had 4 eyewitnesses identifying him as having shot J.D. Tippit, and having recovered from him physically in the theater the .38 pistol, which he pulled out of his belt when they arrested him, and that they found in the weapon 2 different types of ammunition, Winchester Western and Remington Peters, exactly like the slugs that were in the body of J.D. Tippit, and exactly like the shell casings that were found on the ground next to the body of J.D. Tippit. And you say to yourself, and when they went into the theater, and what happened is they received a call that a particular witness had seen Oswald skulking down the street within 2 blocks of where J.D. Tippit had been shot, and the witness believed that the man that he saw was Oswald, and that he looked like he was hiding from the police cars that were zooming up and down the street because of the J.D. Tippit shooting. And he said that he believed that this guy was hiding from the police, and so he followed them. And he followed Oswald to the local theater, the Dallas theater, movie theater, and saw him go in. And he went over and he reported this to the manager of the theater. And the manager of the theater called the police. And 6 squad cars came to the theater, and they turned on the lights in the theater, and they started walking up the aisles, and Lee Harvey Oswald, according to 4 police officers, jumped up to his feet and shouted, "Okay, I guess it's all over now," and pulled the .38 from his waistband, and they jumped him and took the pistol away from him and arrested him and brought him to the police station. And it was there at the police station, when they were attempting to interrogate him, that he refused to tell them what his name was, refused to tell them where he lived, and they found in his wallet the identification of Lee Harvey Oswald, and the other identification, exactly the same name that was used to purchase the Mannlicher Carcano rifle that was on all of the forms for the mail order of the rifle in Lee Harvey Oswald's handwriting. And yet, here we are 50 years later, and over 70% of the people in the United States don't believe that Oswald killed the president. So you say to yourself, what's going on here? Why is it that this doesn't seem fairly clear on the face of it? And what happened is that on that particular day, on November 22nd of 1963, it did seem pretty obvious to the Dallas police, based on that type of evidence. And it did seem pretty obvious to the F.B.I. And when the chief of police in Dallas held up the Mannlicher for all of the media to photograph, and asked him, do they believe that they got the guy that killed the president? And he said they were sure that they had the guy that killed the president. And now, taking you back to that day, that's just some information for you to sit with for a minute. But from the point of view of all of us that were there at the time, alive at that time, you have to remember the kind of trauma that this represented to us all. That when I was actually standing on the drill field in Boston, the Special Forces, and I was the cadet captain, and so that was drilling the guys, and I turned around and saw Sergeant Dunderdale, who was our Army sergeant, coming out of the headquarters, kind of looking completely kind of dazed, and he was just kind of staggered like this across the field, And so I stood everybody at attention, and I went over to where Dunderdale was. And I said, "What's happening? What's the matter? What's the matter with you?" And he said, "They've killed the president. They've killed the president." And I was kind of completely freaked out about what he was talking about. So I went with him over to an Army, one of the old classic 1952 Chevy, khaki Chevys that the Army had. And we turned on Army radio, and we were listening to the bulletins coming in over Army radio about the president having been shot. He's been rushed to Parkland Hospital. It's not clear whether he's still alive or not. Governor Connolly has been hit as well. They didn't have anybody in custody at that point. This was probably only about 12:45 or so Central Time, just less than 15 minutes after the shooting had taken place. And I dismissed the company and told them to get to a television or radio to figure out what was going on. I went back to the campus at Northeastern University where I was. This was an ROTC. And I went back in, we turned on the television, and there's Walter Cronkite. And these are moments that our entire generation remembered vividly of watching what was happening, what was transpiring at that time. That within about an hour of the first bulletins coming out, you began to see the information coming in. John Chancellor was on NBC. Walter Cronkite was on CBS. They were all they were scrambling, trying to set up kind of emergency centers there at the studios to try to cover this thing. And then there was the announcement by Walter Cronkite that the president was dead. And then the bulletins started coming in that they had a man in custody. It was all confusing about whether he'd been taken into custody for killing the president or whether he was taken into custody for something else. There were rumors that there had been some other shooting nearby and that they'd arrested him in a theater somewhere, but he didn't have any rifle with him, but he had a handgun. And so we were all completely fixated about what was going on. Now this was November 22nd, 1963. It was like 3 days before Thanksgiving. And what happened is immediately all the schools and colleges and things across the country all canceled the rest of the classes for the remaining days of that week because people were going to be going home for Thanksgiving holiday anyhow, for Thursday. So they canceled the next 2 or 3 days of classes. So I went out. I was in Boston, which of course is the hometown of the Kennedys. And it was particularly stunning there. I walked from the campus at Northeastern University, where I started college before I transferred over to Harvard College. And I walked into Boston, down Huntington Avenue, across Massachusetts Avenue, down into Boston, and it was like a total ghost town. I mean, there were literally newspapers blowing through the streets. I mean, it looked like one of those science fiction movies where there's only one person left in the world. And usually Will Smith. Or Bruce Wilkes. One of those two guys. Always. So, but there we were walking down the street, and it was just like complete desolation everywhere. Not a soul anywhere. Everybody was in their houses watching the television, trying to figure out what it is that happened. And it was this extraordinary moment of time kind of standing still. Every normal activity in the entire country stopped. And everybody was watching what was happening. I ended up hitchhiking back from Boston up to Lake George, New York, where I grew up, and came into the house with my aunt and uncle where I grew up, and they had the television on, watching, and the stations were going late into the night. I have canceled all other programming, and we were watching what was going on, and they then started to show the live pictures of Air Force One. They showed the live pictures of Lyndon Johnson being sworn in as the new president. on board Air Force One. They actually had to set up special cameras inside Air Force One to try to show it live. It became immediately clear to all of the people that ran the 3 television networks that it was essential to show everybody everything live, because people weren't believing. People weren't believing what was happening. It was so unreal to everybody that this could have possibly happened, that they were all watching everything live, and every single one of the stations insisted upon broadcasting it all live. And so we saw Lyndon Johnson get sworn in. We saw the Air Force One take off from Dallas, from Love Field. They were there. They had the live cameras set up in Washington D.C. When Air Force One landed. They watched them open up the doors. They got the cameras right up close when they opened up the cargo doors of Air Force One. They saw them taking the casket off. You saw, Bobby Kennedy was there and to meet them, and Jacqueline Kennedy climbed out of the cargo bay where she'd been with the body, and you were watching all of this happen. And they brought in a big black funeral car and put the casket in it and drove them away. And people were all trying to find out where are they going with the body? What are they going to be doing with the body? Are they going to have an autopsy of the body? And then reports started coming in where they were going back to Dallas, and they had cameras inside the Dallas police headquarters, and that the whole headquarters was filled with journalists that had flown in from all around the country, and they were inside the Dallas Police Department headquarters. And the halls were all filled up with them, and they all had their big cameras, had those gigantic cameras they were carrying around at the time, with whole film crews carrying packets of batteries around with them, and floodlights trying to keep the place well lit. And we actually saw the police taking Lee Harvey Oswald out of one of the interrogation rooms, and that was the first time anybody got to see him. And they said, "Look, this is the guy that they've got." And he started saying, "Look, I've got to have somebody help me. Somebody's got to come forward and help me here." He said, "I don't know what's going on here." So people shouted out. They said, "Did you kill the president?" And he said, "I didn't kill anybody. I don't know what people are talking about. I haven't been even charged with anything." And they took him down the hallway, and here's the chief of police holding up the Mannlicher rifle like this to all of the media people while they're walking down the halls, in Lee Harvey Oswald protesting, and started saying that he's a patsy. He's just a patsy. And a patsy is a particular term that is used by mafia people. Because sometimes when mafia people will rub somebody out, they'll set somebody else up to take the fall for that, to direct attention away from the mafia. And that's the term. That's the patsy, they call it. And so he said that he was just a patsy in this whole thing. And then they cut back to Washington, D.C., and they were trying to figure out where the president's body was going to be taken. And then they discovered that it was being taken to Bethesda Naval Hospital, where there was going to be an autopsy. And then everybody started talking about, what are they going to do? Are they going to have a funeral? When are they going to have the funeral? I mean, people are going to be coming in from all over the world to come to the funeral. And so how long are they going to postpone this? What kind of ceremony are they going to have? I mean, this was completely unheard of. The only thing that was comparable to this was Lincoln, when he was assassinated. And that they decided they were going to put his body in state in the rotunda. And they started immediately discussing comparisons between Lincoln having been assassinated, how stunning that whole thing was. And so we all began to immediately realize that these events that we were watching, that we were seeing happening, were comparable to Abraham Lincoln having been assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. And then there were some of us that started remembering that all of the high school civics courses that we'd ever seen told us that John Wilkes Booth had killed President Lincoln. And I remembered realizing that I had found out that actually some 18 people had been hung for killing Lincoln. And yet all of the high school courses and all the college courses that you read about it talk about this lone gunman, this guy, John Wilkes Booth, who was a disgruntled Southerner who had misguided sense of loyalty to the South, who had taken it upon himself to kill Abraham Lincoln. And yet there were people high up in the government that were in the cabinet of Lincoln. There were other people that had been questioned, interrogated about this, and all these mysterious people had been hung for the event. But still, because of the comparisons to Lincoln that were going on in the discussions in the next 24 hours, people there was this huge emotional outpouring around the country. I mean, literally, everybody, everywhere you look, were all crying, and I mean, it was like losing a close member of your family. And nobody was discussing, what was he doing? What were they were all talking? They all started talking about the kind of promise that this young man represented, and they began to look back upon the kind of all the idealistic public relations that have been being put forth by the Kennedy clan and the Kennedy family and his cabinet and everybody else. And as happens when someone dies suddenly, all these eulogies start pouring out, and everybody forgets, any of the bad things about the person and starts remembering all the good things, and then starts embellishing the good things. And so for that entire 48-hour period, there was this massive rushing forward on the part of the media, talking. They had seized upon the kind of like the talking point that this young person filled with such promise, that represented such an idealistic vision of the country, re-enkindling the country with a sense of youth and can-do, that it announced, that we were going to land a man on the moon, and had launched the Peace Corps, and all of this kind of effusive, idealistic language started to engulf people, while the people were in an extraordinarily high state of adrenaline. And one of the things that's been noted now historically is that the reason that people remember things so vividly in an accident or in an emergency situation or in some sort of a situation of terror, that people remember those moments forever. And they have post-traumatic stress experiences of reliving those kind of experiences. Because what they've discovered is that when your body is generating high amounts of adrenaline, what it does is it has this very special effect upon your brain. And that it causes everything to get kind of frozen in your brain. And that the emotions that you're feeling under that highly adrenalized state are fixed in your memory in some unique and special way. And what happened is that happened to an entire country in that 48-hour period. And then 48 hours later, when everybody's watching the television, they're preparing the funeral to have a major funeral with every kind of heart-tugging symbol that they can come up with the classic, horse, this thoroughbred horse with these 6-league polished boots, put in the stirrups backwards, and marching at the head of the parade, and the caissons rumbling with the muffled drums, the extraordinary ceremony that was generated around the death of the president was explicitly designed to generate these kind of extraordinarily highly adrenalized states of consciousness on the part of all the people. And it succeeded in doing so. And then they cut away from all of these preparations of the funeral. They cut away to the transport of Lee Harvey Oswald from the Dallas police station in the lockup there, that they're going to take him and transfer him in a big armored car to transfer him to the county jail, where they think that they can provide better protection for him. Because there were huge crowds that were gathered around trying to figure out where he is. I mean, like out of a bad Western. In fact, when they took him from the theater, from the Dallas theater, the Texas theater, there was a throng of some 200 people had already gathered. And they were actually shouting. They were shouting, "Give him to us! Give him to us! We'll take care of him right now." You know, I mean, it was like, of course, this was Texas. On the other hand, but the bottom line is that so while everybody's in this highly adrenalized state, they bring live cameras to the Dallas Police Department to show him being transferred out of the Dallas Police Department to the county jail. And they show him coming down the elevator and then him being taken off the elevator, surrounded by the county sheriffs and the police. And all of a sudden, there's this weird thing happens. There's this big commotion and rustling around, and you hear this pop, pop, pop go on. And Ike Pappas, I believe it was, for ABC News, started shouting out, "He's been shot! He's been shot! He's been shot!" And you couldn't quite see it at the camera angle that they had, but you could see this blur of someone kind of pushing themselves forward toward Oswald. And he's just sticking their hand out like that. You hear this pop, 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 and down he went. And they hauled him off on the stretcher, and he was dead. And everybody's going, this is absolutely extraordinary. This whole set of experiences that the country was going through. And you need to remember that this was when live television was a fairly rare thing. They had started out with television trying to do some live dramas and things like this, but they had gone to a film and videoing everything. Almost all the shows were all videoed, but this now was live. And so everybody was in this real moment. I remember actually seeing the very first live international broadcast with Walter Cronkite, where they actually got everybody all gathered around the televisions to watch this thing, because they actually broadcast a live picture of the Colosseum in Rome, something that everybody would recognize. That's true. And they showed a live. They were all saying, "Okay, it's coming in now." And here's Walter Cronkite broadcasting this like it's an event, watching the Colosseum in Rome come into focus on the televisions. So that this was a fairly new invention. As I pointed out, the Kennedy-Nixon debate was the very first presidential debate ever broadcast on television. So that this everybody gathering around their televisions and watching this series of events taking place was a major national shared emotional trauma that occurred. And with Lee Harvey Oswald being dead, then what happened is and this is all part of the day's event, the police made an announcement after he was killed that they were certain that he was the guy that had killed the president. Wow. And yet he hadn't been charged with that. He was still charged just with having killed Tippit. And yet they started announcing that they were certain that he's the one that had killed the president. And then J. Edgar Hoover was contacted by Lyndon Johnson, now that Lyndon Johnson was sworn in. And Lyndon Johnson and Hoover had the conversation, and Hoover gave an instruction to the FBI to prepare an FBI investigative report, and you need to be certain that it convinces the American people that Lee Harvey Oswald is the one who killed the president and that he acted completely alone. They actually gave the assignment to the FBI to prepare that report. And that report was prepared. The Dallas police prepared their investigative report. and those things were put forth to the public, that both the Dallas police and the FBI had determined definitively that Lee Harvey Oswald is the man who had killed the president, and that he'd done so acting completely alone. Now, we were a far less sophisticated people at that point in time in our collective lives than you are now, and so we didn't say to ourselves, "What are you kidding me?" You know that within 48 hours of a crime of this nature, that you've got the FBI and the Dallas police are all completely convinced that this guy did it. You don't have any eyewitnesses that saw him do it. That he was arrested for a completely different crime. And so, but nobody questioned this. Everybody just accepted the fact that there was this terrible tragedy that had just occurred, and that our country was totally traumatized. And then they have this huge ceremony, of the funeral, with the muffled drums and the riderless horse and the black long tails, and they went to the St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington D.C., where the Kennedys was their church, and then they began to roll out all of the kind of classic structural symbols of sacrifice, and the young person martyred, and they started overlays of Christian mythos, Catholic mythology around the death of Christ, the death of Kennedy, a person sacrificed, and then the word started coming out that Lee Harvey Oswald was a communist sympathizer. They started showing all the pictures with the funeral. Well, the funeral is going on. They're breaking away to showing pictures of Lee Harvey Oswald when he was arrested on the streets in Dallas, handing out literature in favor of Cuba. And so what's happening is you're getting this extraordinary experience of high style propaganda going on, right in the context of a huge emotional opening of the hearts of the people by this funeral. And then, of course, the classic, film, the classic live television thing of Little John, with the famous, standing there saluting his dad's casket going by. It was like right out of Central Casting, this event that was going on, and it had the initial exact desired effect. And they felt confident enough about it, but they wanted to have an official determination of what it is that had happened here. So what they did is Lyndon Johnson decided he was going to appoint a presidential commission to basically thoroughly lay out all the details showing that Lee Harvey Oswald had done this, and he'd done this alone. And the first person that they went to, that we touched upon in the discussion the other day, they went to Earl Warren, basically stepping completely over the normal law enforcement channels and going directly to the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, to Earl Warren, asking him to chair the commission. And then they went to Allen Dulles, the former head of the Central Intelligence Agency, because as far as everybody knew pretty much at that point, Allen Dulles had simply retired back in October of 1962. That no one knew what the depth of the ire on the part of the president that terminated Dulles. So Dulles is brought in as the symbol of the Central Intelligence Agency, those who know everything. The CIA, the ones that know all the secrets, that they can come and be trusted to verify that this was. So you had the Supreme Court, you had the Central Intelligence Agency, you had all of these big officials come together to come into the Warren report, and then they prepared the Warren report over the period of the next year. And nobody knew about the inside workings of what was going on. No one knew that Kennedy had, at the beginning of that month in November, issued a national security decision directive saying that he was going to be withdrawing U.S. military forces from Vietnam by the end of 1964. No one knew that on June 5th of 1963, President Kennedy had issued an executive order ordering the printing of billions of dollars of $2 bills that were silver certificates and gold certificates that had the potential of replacing Federal Reserve notes as the financial system of the country. No one knew that President Kennedy had opened the back channel to Castro to try to normalize relations with Castro. What we did know is that he had made a number of public speeches, but about the need to have peace in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But we knew nothing about the fact that the covert operations camps had been going on under Richard Nixon and Kennedy, attempting to overthrow the government of Castro. As far as we knew, there was this completely unprovoked decision on the part of the Soviet Union to put nuclear missiles in Cuba to basically threaten our country, like all those communists do. I mean, as far as we all knew at that time. So there was this state of consciousness on the part of the American people where we were stunned, we were emotionally distraught collectively about what had happened, but we were being told by all of the people in positions of authority that it was just this terrible tragedy, that this one individual, deranged, lone gunman had killed the president. And that was the state that we were all in at the time. And Lyndon Johnson came in, and we realized that one of the very first things that Lyndon Johnson did was he took upon himself the obligation to do two things. One is to push forward the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964, calling upon the image and the emotions around the dead young president to basically carry into fruition his desire, the young president, now dead, to have a Federal Civil Rights Act. And at the same time, mounted up and geared up the war in Vietnam, began to send more and more observers and military advisors into Vietnam. These two issues became centerpieces of Lyndon Johnson's remaining year of 1964 in carrying on Kennedy's presidency. Everybody was perfectly aware of the fact that Lyndon Johnson was going to run and be the Democratic nominee. Everybody was convinced that he was going to win. Even the Republicans were aware of the fact that he was going to win. So what they did is they basically allowed a certain element of the Republican Party, which is a subgroup of the Republican Party, to basically snatch the nomination because they knew it was going to be a throwaway. And that was Goldwater. That Barry Goldwater, who was this reactionary, not just a conservative like Everett Dirksen and the rest of the leadership of the Republican Party, but a Cold War warrior, right-wing reactionary who was saying things like, excess in the name of liberty is no vice, and that therefore being an extremist and a reactionary is an honorable thing. And even if people don't generally agree with you, to have the courage to stand by your convictions. And it was a classic minority rant, basically, his campaign. And it became the most devastating political defeat of recent American political history. And Lyndon Johnson swept to victory in 1964. And the Warren Commission came out with its report, conclusion that the president had been killed by Oswald, and it was he and he alone that did it, and that we could all kind of put that to rest, and that we should all get behind the Kennedy-Johnson war in Vietnam that was now cranking up more and more. Lots of publicity about how fascinated and devoted Kennedy was to the special forces, and how they were so flexible and mobile and highly competent. And they began to project upon the special forces a lot of those same kind of qualities and charisms of the young president. Virile, tough, independent, special forces people that you could be parachuted in behind lines, coincidentally where people had lived in their own hometown for 10, 1,500 generations, that we were just happened to be parachuting into their neighborhood. And yet this was an heroic endeavor, and that we should be basically supporting this in the name of the dead young president. Remember how bad we feel about the poor young dead president, and therefore let's get behind this war effort that he really wanted to have done, and let's get behind the passage of the Civil Rights Act. And Johnson played upon both of those things. And then Johnson, in his own right, mounted, since he couldn't take credit for the decision to land on the moon, he couldn't take credit for the decision for the Peace Corps. He didn't want to take sole credit for being the one cranking up the war in Vietnam. So what he did is he announced a war on poverty, and he took this as his own unique mantle, that he was going to mount a war on poverty. He was going to generate programs like the food stamp program and improve medical assistance to people. And there was the irony of it is that Lyndon Johnson was one of the most vile criminals in the history of American politics. I mean, to state it bluntly, that Bobby Baker, his chief bag man that was delivering $100 bills to other people, the other congressmen and senators. I mean, he was a classic, right out of the old corrupt Tammany Hall kind of politics. And yet because of this glow around the Kennedy presidency, of which he was the vice president, and he was the heir to that image, he basically clothed himself in that glow, and mounted a press for the passage of the Federal Civil Rights Act, which many experts doubt very seriously President Kennedy would have ever been really able to successfully get passed because of the opposition of the Southern Dixiecrats. But because Lyndon Johnson was the representative from the South, in fact, that's why he was put on the ticket by the Kennedys, to try to carry some of those Dixiecrats in the South on just raw political patronage, that what Lyndon Johnson was able to do was able to strong arm a lot of those reactionary Southern segregationists to come on to support the Civil Rights Act, arguing to them in closed sessions that this is the least that you're going to get. If you fight this thing off, it could be even worse for you. They may actually enforce the Civil Rights Act. I mean, it could be worse. Let's just pass this thing and get it done. And so he got it through. And so there was this attempt on the part of Lyndon Johnson to lay claim to all of the kind of idealism, all of the kind of sense of possibilities, of hope and progress that the young president and the Kennedys brought with them. The tragedy, literally, in the Greek sense of tragedy, was that he, like all other tragic figures, has an absolute fundamental character flaw, Lyndon Johnson. And this vile, vicious effort that he engaged in to increase the war in Vietnam, turns out that he chose to do this by an absolute conscious deception worked upon the American people. Is that he actually sent radar picket destroyers, the USS Henry Knox, and another one. They sent them up around North Vietnam, inside their international waters, inside their territorial waters, up and down the coastline, firing big 12-inch guns, firing them onto the shoreline, and trying to solicit some kind of a response on the part of the North Vietnamese so that they could fabricate an incident. A classic false flag operation. Much as I discussed with you earlier, the false flag operation called Operation Northwoods that had been proposed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Lemonster and Curtis LeMay and Harley Burke and the others, that they had actually proposed back in 1962 an Operation Northwoods in which they would fabricate a military assault upon the United States by Cuba, where they would actually dress up Cuban anti-Castro exiles in Cuban military uniforms and attack Guantanamo, based down in Cuba, and kill American service people, and actually attack U.S. base, try to blow up aircraft or naval vessels, and actually proposed having an attack launched, a terrorist attack launched in the United States, in Miami, at a shopping center, the heart of America. And that was actually proposed in Operation Northwoods. But what happened is when Lyndon Johnson got in, but that was rejected by Kennedy and the Kennedy administration. But when Lyndon Johnson came into power, they actually designed an effective false flag operation. But what they did is they weren't going to dress up people like North Vietnamese because they didn't have enough Vietnamese to pretend that they were they. So what they did is they actually sent the radar picket destroyers along the coastline, firing the big guns onto the shore, soliciting some kind of response. And then what happened is they momentarily thought that the North Vietnamese had launched a PT boat out from one of the harbors out to meet the USS Henry Knox, and that they might have fired a torpedo at the USS Henry Knox. So they issued an alert and sent it all the way back to Washington, D.C., live, real time, saying, we've been fired upon. They're shooting torpedoes at us. Well, Johnson in the military, Joint Chiefs of Staff, said, this is great. This is just exactly what we wanted. Let's get them. And so what they did is they already had drafted up actually, a resolution to get the Congress to retaliate against them for having launched an attack against poor innocent U.S. ships that were in international waters minding their own business when they were unprovokedly attacked by North Vietnam, probably because they opposed our way of life. And so that's what they put before Congress, and they knew within 5 minutes of having issued that emergency alert to Washington, D.C., they knew perfectly well that no torpedoes had been fired at them, and they actually sent a corrective message saying, "Oh, oops, my bad. There were no torpedoes fired at us." And what Johnson and the Joint Chiefs, they just disregarded that entirely. And they actually got a copy of the alert and gave it to the Congress.
What was the incident called?
The Bay of Tonkin. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, that was where the incident took place. And so they got Congress to sign a resolution authorizing Lyndon Johnson to take all necessary responsive measures to protect innocent U.S. military life, such as that on the Henry Knox and the others. And so what he did is he cranked up authorization to send tens of thousands of U.S. military into Vietnam. Instead of pretending they were just military advisors, that these were actual U.S. military infantry to go flooding into South Vietnam to try to prop up the government of Ngo Dinh Diem. And Ngo Dinh Diem is a guy who actually they got him from Columbia University. He was a graduate student at Columbia University back in 1954 when General Giap, who just died last week, that you may have heard about, General Giap of Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh and Viet Cong actually surrounded the French at Dien Bien Phu back in 1954 and basically clobbered them and gave them a chance to retreat and pull their forces out of Vietnam, and that they would draw a line along one of the parallels and allow the French forces to withdraw behind there and to leave Vietnam under the sole condition that it would not be considered under any circumstances to be a political border of any kind. Mm-hmm. And what happened is when the French took advantage of that and pulled out, Eisenhower, the Eisenhower-Nixon administration, moved right in and declared that to be a political boundary, saying that there was a North Vietnam and a South Vietnam, which there had never been, and saying that the United States was going to support the new South Vietnamese government that happened to be run by Ngo Dinh Diem, who the United States basically took from Columbia University and flew him over there and installed him as the titular leader of South Vietnam and started providing military support for him. This was one of the major initiatives that was taken by Lyndon Johnson, and it turns out that it was the second National Security Decision Directive signed by Lyndon Johnson immediately after he became the new president, reversing the National Security Decision Directive that had been issued by Kennedy earlier in November. And I say it was the second National Security Decision Directive because the first one was canceling the printing of the silver certificates that Kennedy had ordered. That they had printed out several $1 billion worth of these, and there was a second printing scheduled for the end of November. And so, interestingly, the two first moves of Lyndon Johnson was to cancel and reverse those two things on the part of Kennedy.
Were people aware of it at the time that was going on, or was that information released later?
No, it was all later. That was later, and I want to be careful. I want to be careful not to feather in too much information here at this particular point that causes us to start to be more suspicious now, here in retrospect, than we were at that time. Because it's important for us today, at least, for us today to recognize that the state of mind that we were all in at that time was that everybody assumed that the FBI and the reports that were coming in from the Dallas Police Department and the Warren Commission were all credible, reliable people. And that was the state of mind that we were in, and this peculiar thing started happening, this two-front offensive on the part of the Lyndon Johnson administration of getting the Federal Civil Rights Act passed and accelerating the war in Vietnam. Those are the things that happened when the Warren report came in, and volume after volume after volume of information was purported all to support the conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald committed this crime, and some 27 different pieces of information, including palm prints on the rifle, fingerprints on the trigger guard, the finding of the bullets, these casings, the Winchester Western and Remington Peters shell casings next to J.D. Tippit, and the bullets in his body. And what I want to do is just close today's, because we can have, now we'll have some questions going back and forth, but I'll just plant one little seed of information to you, is that we have here that Tippit was shot with 2 different brands of bullets. Okay? So I said Winchester Western and Remington Peters. When Oswald was apprehended, his revolver was fully loaded with 3 Winchester Western cartridges and 3 Remington Peters cartridges. He also had 5 additional Winchester Western rounds in his pocket. 4 bullets were pulled from Tippit's body. 3 were Winchester Western, and 1 was Remington Peters. What they failed to tell you is that while in the body of J.D. Tippit were 3 Winchester Western slugs and 1 Remington Peters slug, the 4 shell casings, 2 of them were Winchester Western and 2 of them were Remingtons. And so you say that just wasn't noticed by people at the time, and yet his pistol was filled with rounds, and yet somehow whoever killed Tippit had decided that what they were going to do is they were going to dump out 4 of the 6 slugs of the shell casings and just throw them on the ground right there. It was a revolver.
So,
They're not automatically ejected. That you have to open up the revolver and take them out of the rolling barrel of the gun. And yet that's the kind of thing that just people didn't notice at all at that point in time because of the state of mind that we were in. The desire on the part of the government institutions to have this thing settled, to have people put it in the past, to utilize the memory of the president to get positive legislation passed for the Civil Rights Act, and to mount this war that was necessary. So that's where we are. Those are the basic events of the day that occurred. A lot of the kind of more precise information about exactly what happened in Dealey Plaza and who was there, what were the angle of the bullets, what were the bullets like. These are all things that start to come up later. This was the basic experience that we all had and that we were intended to have as a result of the events of that day. Okay? So I promise you I'm going to try to be disciplined to always finish here as close as I can to quarter after so that we have a full half hour for discussions. But we want to focus on the students for the questions. Tell me your names again, so I remember all the time.
I'm Seth.
Seth, I think.
So is it then presumed by at least Dallas PD and F.B.I. that Oswald killed J.D. Tippit in the street and then went up to the Texas Book Depository building and shot JFK?
No, it's the other way around. The President Kennedy was killed at 12:30 Central Time, and Tippit was killed at 1:46.
Okay.
But an hour and 15 minutes later. Hour and 16 minutes later. Yeah. And a paraffin test was actually performed on it was one of the pieces of it. A paraffin test was performed on Oswald's hand, which is that if you fire a weapon, fumes are generated out of the weapon from the gunpowder, and nitrates tend to get on your hand, and they are absorbed by the skin. And so what they do is they put the hot, warm paraffin on your hand, and it opens up the pores, and it takes out any of the contaminants that are on your hand. And they ran a paraffin test on Lee Harvey Oswald's right hand, and it proved positive. Problem is, they ran a paraffin test on the right side of his cheek. It would have been if he had fired a rifle, and it was negative.
When did he say, Christopher?
Christopher.
When did he say, Oswald, that he was a patsy?
Right. That the first time any of the public laid eyes on it. when he was being moved from one interrogation room to another interrogation room on the night of the 22nd of November, when the media people were all in the hallway. They had the cameras live, and he leaned back like this and said, "I'm just a patsy. I'm just a patsy. Somebody's got to come forward and help me." That was right that night.
Just wondering what happened to Jack Ruby afterwards, and if he was charged with anything.
Jack Ruby was charged with first-degree murder for killing Oswald, and there was a big set of discussions about the trial, of what was going to be going on, and there was huge, massive pressure put on him to plead guilty. And they threatened him with the death penalty if he didn't plead guilty. They offered that if he would plead guilty and not make any statements, that he'd be given life with no chance of his being executed. And Texas is pretty big on executing people, so this was not a hollow offer to him. So he pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. And when the Warren Commission was active, he started contacting them that he wanted to have Warren come to talk with him because there was something that he wanted to tell him about. And Warren showed up at the jail, and Ruby said, "Look, you got to take me out of here. You got to take me out of here because I won't last. I'll be killed because there's something very important I need to tell you about, and I need you to take me to Washington, and then I can tell you everything about what's happened." And Warren wouldn't do it. And Ruby contracted a case of cancer and died very quickly after having been diagnosed with cancer. In some people's minds, mysteriously quickly, but that's what happened to him. Your name?
Brendan.
Brendan, that's right.
Did this officer, J.D. Tippett, have any significance over that other officers did not? Like, was he the head of police, or did he have political connections? Like would there be a reason to for someone to murder him other than being an authority figure?
That's a good question. So that Brendan can start focusing a little bit on J.D. Tippett and trying to figure out who J.D. Tippett is, and kind of share it with us, what you can find out about him. There's a bunch of stuff about him. I'll give you a hint that shortly after Tippett was killed, there was a vehicle that was spotted sitting in a parking lot about a block and a half away from the site where he was killed, and the person was seen in the vehicle that the person identified as Lee Harvey Oswald, and he copied down the license plate number. And it turns out that the license was registered to a guy who happened to work for a place called Collins Radio, and the Collins Radio company happened to own one of the ships that was used to attempt a further landing in Cuba in late October of 1962. And it turns out that that person is the guy who delivered flowers to J.D. Tippett's widow and was one of the few people to go to his funeral that they weren't able to identify. And you follow that lead and you'll find some interesting information. We have to focus on the students' time until we get here. Yes?
You said that Lee Harvey Oswald made some kind of statement just before he was arrested in the movie theater.
Yes. According to the testimony of 4 police officers. You always have to remember that.
Did any of the movie audience testify similarly to the officers?
It isn't cited for the most part. And what you need to do is you need to dig down into there's a lot of information actually in the Warren Commission volumes that was not included in their final report. and actually a lot of it is contrary to some of their conclusions. And what they say is they place higher credibility on some witnesses than others. But as far as I know right now, what had happened is that they were clearing the theater out of people because the manager of the theater, the person who had witnessed, the man he said was Oswald, hiding from the police who were rushing to the Tippit death scene, and he followed Oswald to the theater, went to the manager, and brought the manager in and pointed out Oswald to him. And so the manager came in with the police and pointed out Oswald to the police when they turned all the lights on in the theater. And they basically moved all the other people kind of out of there. There was an effort to kind of move them out of there because they didn't know what type of an event might take place here. Because they were obviously in sort of a very high state of dudgeon over the fact the president had been killed, and now they had J.D. Tippit killed, and the people that actually went to the theater and arrested Oswald were the people assigned to investigate the Tippit killing, not the Kennedy killing. But they all testify that he stood up and put his hands up like this and said, "Well, okay, I guess it's all over now." But then when they went up to try to take him into custody, they assert that he reached and pulled the pistol out of his waistband, and one of the officers, McCarran, I guess anyway, leapt across the seats and grabbed him, and then four of them jumped on him and took the pistol away from him. And then they had the pistol in custody. And there had been all the stuff about the ballistics on the pistol that we'll get into later about how clear is it that it matched the Tippit death weapon. Okay? Who's next? Yes, any name?
Reed. I was wondering to what extent, if at all, the public was conscious of the fact that the president had been assassinated in the home state of the vice president, the guy who gets to be president after. It kind of seems like, I don't know, would that be part of the public consciousness?
Well, one of the, it's an interesting question. It opens on to another issue. Is that what happened is that it was clear that all of the commentators and all of the newspapers, all the major news media, all got right on board. This whole thing, because again, there's this kind of elite element in the American culture that believes that they in common run everything. And what they do is they all pick up signals from each other very quickly as to how they're supposed to treat the great unwashed masses. And in this particular instance, there was a great deal of concern on the part of the ruling elite that somehow the American people were going to get out of control here, or what had happened. And so in addition to J. Edgar Hoover contacting them and saying, look, let's get a report finished right away, making absolutely clear that it was Oswald and he did this all completely by himself, the media themselves all started rushing in, and they were smart enough to raise certain questions, but they wouldn't raise them publicly. What they did is exactly the opposite. They tried to quash those kind of questions. So what they did is they started talking about immediately what the legitimate purpose for the president being in Texas was all about. That Lyndon Johnson was, that they were trying to heal this rift that was going on between Senator Yarborough and John Connally, two guys inside the Democratic Party, and Lyndon Johnson was playing the peacemaker. That he was actually inviting Kennedy to come down because he wanted to get Yarborough, who was kind of the more liberal guy, and Connally, who was the more conservative guy, to both join together to support Kennedy's presidency. And Lyndon Johnson was doing that because Lyndon Johnson wanted to be left on the ticket. And there was all kinds of pressure going on from Bobby, among others, to dump Johnson, to get rid of him, and bring on a more progressive and liberal person who they could work with in their second administration and do a lot more progressive things, like make peace with Russia, pull the troops out of Vietnam, have the Civil Rights Act passed, do a lot of these things that are much more progressive than Lyndon Johnson's normal instincts. And so the way that the media pitched the entire thing about a question of, wait a second, what's the story here? Here they are in Texas, and he gets killed, and the Texas favorite son becomes president. Isn't somebody going to ask that question? So what they were doing is they were nipping all of those questions in the bud immediately. As soon as they realized that this might occur to the people, they would rush up with stories explaining how you don't have to be worried about that kind of thing. And they all cooperated in that way. Who's next? Yes.
My name's Nashi.
Nashi.
I'm a little confused in the timeline of things. So is that apparently Tippit was killed at 12:30?
No, Tippit was killed at 1:46.
Okay, so then JFK was theoretically assassinated at 12:30.
That's right.
Afterwards, Tippit was killed.
That's right.
2 days later, he was arrested in the prison.
No, same day.
Oh, it was the same
Yes,
day?
yes. It was this very same afternoon. That within 20 minutes of the shooting of Tippit, the report came in that a suspect, a suspicious acting person, had gone into the Texas theater, and so that they were all their blood was up, rushing to the Tippit death scene. Everybody was kind of crazy over the Kennedy thing, and then they got this report that there was this suspicious acting person at the theater, and so they all swooped on the theater like that. All of this took place right within an hour.
Did you say that in Oswald's pistol that they found on him, he had different types of bullets in it?
Yes, there are two different brands of bullets. He had what did I say? The details here.
Winchester.
Yeah, though I know the Winchester Western and the Remington Peters. Those were the two different types.
Yeah.
And in his gun, let's see. Let's see here. He had five of the bullets. Here it goes. When Oswald was apprehended, his revolver was fully loaded with 3 Winchester Western cartridges and 3 Remington Peters cartridges. So he had that in his pistol, and the casings on the ground were Remington and Western, 2 different brands of things, and the slugs in his body were the 2 different brands. And that's where everybody just stopped at that. Oh, look. Isn't that definitive?
Yeah. But it was 3 and 1 in the body, and 2 and 2 on the ground.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yes, Greg.
Well, for any of the students that wanted to see what happened in real time, there's a DVD that was made called JFK 3 Shots That Changed America, but it's on YouTube. And it's basically nothing but raw footage of everything that happened over those days, whether you disagree with the number of bullets in the title or not. But anyway, 3 Shots That Changed America. It's JFK, 3 Shots That Changed America. You can look it up on YouTube and watch the whole thing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of resources. And, in the middle-sized one, the middle-size syllabus and the big syllabus, you'll find lots and lots of interactive links where you can go see the videos of what was going on that day. Your name again?
Alan?
Alan. Right.
Yeah. So what was Oswald's motive for killing Tippit?
Well, that's one of the interesting things we need to look at. What I'm saying is that on the day that it happened, and in the immediate aftermath of the couple days we've covered here so far, is that everybody just assumed that somehow J.D. Tippit had encountered Oswald, and that Oswald was somehow a suspect, and that Oswald had killed him out of a demonstration of his sense of guilt over his having been the guy that killed the president, and that he was fleeing, basically, and that he encountered Tippit and killed him in order to effectuate his escape. That's the presumption that everybody was supposed to get at that particular time. Okay. So now, yes.
So I kind of have a point I want to make about the whole idea. So the concept of narrative and the books and how you can use a narrative to make a believable point.
Yes.
Well, can that work in reverse? If it's not a very structured narrative, can it be an unbelievable story?
Oh yes, if there's a break in the narrative, if you're going along relating certain information and all of a sudden something occurs that is completely completely disharmonious to the natural flow of the narrative, the persuasive power of the narrative is interrupted. And that's why they ignore them. They leave those things out entirely.
Well, I guess I'm trying to make a point about, for the sake of argument, Oswald is guilty.
Yeah.
And then it's just unbelievable because it's not a very, the story doesn't fit very well.
Tell me what you think. Tell me what you think about what you know so far that is most inconsistent with the narrative being true. Posner sets forth.
I was trying to make a point about just narratives in general.
Yes.
And how if JFK died and then that impact on America, that doesn't form a very cohesive narrative for people, and that's why they're so stunned at what's happening. That no matter what is being told to them is somehow unbelievable.
Yeah, that's right. Well, what I hear you trying to say is that the American people found it completely unbelievable that such a huge history-changing event could have occurred just because of the idiosyncratic action of one person all by himself just doing something like that. That it doesn't make any sense because the American people are trained to believe that everything makes sense, including our being in charge. It really is. There's this great romantic narrative of the what do they call it, extraordinary country, the
American exceptionalism.
Exceptionalism. It's this American exceptionalism story. And there's a whole narrative of the bold pilgrims coming over and making friends with the Indians and rescuing the promised land from the infidel primitives. There's a whole narrative that goes on here, and part of it is that things that cause complete alterations in the flow of history have to have some grand purpose or some grand cause, or else nothing makes any sense. And part of this, why they have to rush in, the elite have to rush in and make sense out of it for everybody, is because they're the ones in charge of everything that makes sense. And it makes sense to everybody to leave them in charge. And if things stop making sense, they're going to start questioning about maybe they better change things somehow. Yes, Wesley, and then...
I was wondering if you could talk about the skeptic article.
Yes.
I just thought my opinion on it was kind of interesting because it seemed that it was offering all this skepticism on skepticism.
Yes.
And
it was.
It just ended up seeming like at the end just like blind faith. It's kind of weird because it was offering all the different opinions possible. Like the mob did it, the CIA did it, the Joint Chiefs did it, everybody. And then at the end of each paragraph, it would just give some fact that had just as much truth as any of the facts that it gave at the beginning of the paragraph. And then it was just like, it was Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah. They're inherently skeptical. And so what they've done is they've said that we're skeptical of the skeptics. And once they get targeted on who they're going after, the college pathology, remember, is that here, you send us a positive thesis of any kind, and we'll destroy it. And your thesis is that the president was killed by a conspiracy. So whatever conspiracy you want to offer up, we'll blow it up for you. And so what he's done is he's just kind of casually. You'll notice in the latter pages of the article, he goes through some several. He lists on page 48 of the thing that you have. He lists, seven different attacks on conspiracy theorists, where he says, in their reliance on inherently unreliable eyewitness testimony, that's number one, because he's asserting as a skeptic that all eyewitness testimony is inherently suspect. That is, are you going to believe me or your lying eyes? This is the thing that detectives always say. Are you going to believe me or your lying eyes that you saw the thing itself. It says, and then it says that, and then they also rely upon lay interpretations of forensic evidence. Lay people have no right to question forensics experts. And then it says that, such as the head snap, this will become a major issue that we'll talk about, the so-called head snap in the Zapruder film. You know, the fact that the president gets, all of a sudden you see this gigantic orange blot, you know, on the Zapruder film, and the president falling backwards over to the left and down. And then they do it over and over again. This is the thing in the JFK movie that Garrison did. He played this over the Zapruder film over and over for the jury and say, backwards into the left, backwards into the left, thereby implying that he'd been hit from the forward to the right, that he'd been hit in the head with a bullet and it caused him to fall backwards into the left. And what the skeptics argue is, oh well, you shoot somebody in the back of the head, and what happens is it causes their head to snap back. Because it causes spasms. And they have a detail that it causes spasms. If you're shot in the back of the head, it causes spasms to the neck muscles. They'll snap your head back like that. And so that they get all these experts, like the global warming guys.
Well, what I thought was that at best this article proved that there was no possible way of knowing. But yet it made this jump to a conclusion that the existing theory, the lone gunman theory, was the correct theory. But I don't think that conclusion can be made from this article whatsoever.
Well, it's interesting. I must say that when I read the article the first time and saw the kind of 27 different factual contentions that they were setting forth, as though they were basically agreed upon, you know, that you string together 27 facts like that and put them in front of the average American jury, and somebody's going to prison in a hurry here over this, you know. And so there is a colorable appeal that this has, and that's why I wanted to start out with it. I wanted us to. It was funny because one of the interns, I was asking him. I said, I want you to put together for me the most persuasive possible set of evidence that you can that Lee Harvey Oswald did this, and he did it alone. And every single time he got to one of the critical facts, he kept saying, well, this just falls completely apart. The minute that you start trying to put any weight down on it, it just falls apart completely. And so he couldn't come to any conclusion. He said it's impossible to believe that Lee Harvey Oswald did this acting alone. And I said, well, that's not adequate, because he had to come to the conclusion that he did. And so this is the best place where they marshal some of that factual information. Okay, one more. You were going to ask me more questions.
Oh, yeah.
I'll call you on time.
How can we believe, certain facts like, there was 2 bullets on the floor, two and two, but there was 3 and 1 kind of thing?
Yeah.
Who determines that those are facts? Like, how can we believe the legitimacy of those things if so much evidence was destroyed or altered? How
it's a great question. I'll tell you that the one of the most important possible principles that you can follow in trying to evaluate information is that when a person makes a concession to you that is directly contrary to their interests and is directly contrary to the thesis that they're basically maintaining, if they're the source of that information, you can pretty much take it to the bank. See, because they won't acknowledge that stuff. There's no reason for them to fabricate that kind of an information, And so there's a doctrine of law called an acknowledgement against your own criminal interests. When you make an admission against your own criminal interests, like saying, yes, last Thursday I happened to rob that bank. People aren't usually running around confessing to things they didn't do like that. It's another thing to say that, I was in Florida with my girlfriend. And your girlfriend says, yes, he was with me. Everybody can tell that they've got a reason for saying that to try to exonerate themselves. When a person, this is information directly from the Dallas police, and it just sits right there looking at you, and you go, "What is that?" Tommy, you had a question. I want to. Yeah, you tried it 3 or 4 times. I want to let the kids go.